It was a busy Monday morning at the downtown bank. The sunlight poured through the glass windows, lighting up the marble floors and the polished counters. Customers were lining up, some carrying briefcases, others holding folders filled with bills and documents. The air smelled faintly of coffee, a mix of the morning rush and the hum of fluorescent lights. The bank staff moved quickly, attending to transactions, answering questions, and managing the constant flow of people. Among the customers was a man dressed casually in a simple shirt and jeans. He walked slowly, looking around as if seeing everything for the first time. There was something different about him, a quiet confidence in the way he carried himself. He didn't hurry or fumble with his documents like most people. Instead, he moved deliberately, observing each interaction around him. What no one knew was that this man was not an ordinary customer. He was the CEO of the bank, someone used to running the business from the top-floor office with a clear view of every decision, every transaction. Today, he wanted to see things differently. He wanted to step into the world of the customers and the staff, to witness how things really worked on the ground. He had planned this carefully. He had dressed down to avoid recognition, leaving behind the expensive suits and luxury watches that were usually his daily attire. He had even practiced a slightly awkward way of handling documents and identification, so it would appear he was just another ordinary man trying to get his banking done. His purpose was simple, yet challenging: to experience the bank as any customer would and to observe the staff's behavior without them knowing who he was. The man moved toward the first teller counter. The teller, a young woman in her 20s, greeted him with a polite smile. She was friendly, efficient, and focused on the task at hand. He handed her a simple deposit form, fumbled slightly with his ID, and asked a few questions about the process. Her patience was steady, her tone calm. He noted everything in his mind: the way she handled multiple customers, how she maintained her composure under pressure, and how genuinely she seemed to care about each person's experience. He walked around the bank, quietly observing other staff members. One security guard caught his attention. The man was standing too rigidly, scanning each customer with a look of suspicion. He didn't smile. He didn't acknowledge anyone except to bark orders. The CEO noted how this might make customers feel unwelcome, how it could create tension in the bank even when everything was running smoothly. He moved on to another counter where a middle-aged man worked, a man known among staff for his strict and unapproachable nature. This was the person he was most interested in today. The man at the counter barely looked up when the CEO approached. He was counting cash, tapping pens, and managing forms at the same time. His expression was stern, almost angry, as if any disturbance would ruin his day. The CEO, following his plan, handed over his documents in a slightly clumsy manner, pretending to be confused about the forms. He asked a few questions about a deposit, deliberately mixing up details to see how the staff would respond. The employee's patience wore thin almost immediately. He frowned, his voice rising slightly. Other customers noticed the tension building at the counter. The CEO tried to maintain calm, speaking softly and politely, explaining his confusion and asking for help. The man at the counter, however, seemed determined not to listen. He repeated his instructions sharply, his tone bordering on rude. Every word felt heavy, like a hammer striking the air between them. The CEO stayed calm, careful not to lose his composure. He had seen this kind of behavior before, of course, but now he was seeing it from the other side, experiencing firsthand the way employees could let frustration affect their professionalism. He watched as the man's impatience grew, noticed the way his hands shook slightly as he gestured, the tension in his shoulders, the tight set of his jaw. It was a human moment, a glimpse of someone pushed beyond their comfort zone, yet handled in a way that could be damaging if left unchecked. The other customers in line shifted uncomfortably. Some whispered to each other, some frowned at the rising tension, while a few began filming discreetly on their phones. The CEO realized how quickly a small misunderstanding could escalate, how easily a customer could feel attacked or humiliated. He kept his voice calm, repeating his questions politely, hoping to see how the man would resolve the situation. Instead of calming down, the employee called for additional help. He gestured to a nearby security guard, explaining in sharp tones that he suspected something was wrong. The CEO, still undercover, allowed the situation to unfold, observing every reaction, every decision. The guard approached, eyes narrowing as he looked at the CEO. The man at the counter explained something quickly, his voice tight, pointing at the CEO as if accusing him of wrongdoing. The tension escalated. The CEO could see the confusion on the guard's face, the way he tried to make sense of the situation without full information. The customers watched, some gasping, some whispering, all curious about the sudden commotion. The employee, now convinced that the man was hiding something, attempted to detain him, citing suspicions of fraud. The CEO, maintaining his calm demeanor, allowed this to happen, experiencing the full intensity of being misjudged and mishandled. At this moment, the CEO's mind was racing, but his expression remained neutral. He noted the physicality of the situation, the grip on his arm, the rough push toward a security corner, the murmurs of the crowd. Everything was unfolding exactly as he had hoped to observe. The human element, the stress, the reaction under pressure. He saw fear, frustration, and misunderstanding collide in a single moment, creating chaos that had nothing to do with the bank's financial operations, but everything to do with human behavior. The security guard looked to the man at the counter for instructions, unsure of how to proceed. The employee, still flustered, repeated his accusations, gesturing wildly. The CEO held his ground, speaking softly, trying to explain, but his words fell on deaf ears. The situation was tense, uncomfortable, and increasingly dramatic. The customers were now fully engaged, some recording, some murmuring advice, some just watching silently, sensing that something serious was happening. Through it all, the CEO remained calm, composed, and observant. He was not angry. He was studying. Every detail mattered. The reactions of the staff, the behavior of the security guard, the expressions of the customers, the micro-expressions that revealed stress, guilt, or defensiveness. He had wanted to experience this firsthand, and now he was living it in real time. Even as he was being roughly handled, he could see lessons everywhere. This moment was more than a test of patience. It was a revelation of human behavior under stress, how people perceive authority, how quickly they jump to conclusions, how pride and ego can cloud judgment. He could feel the impact of these actions on everyone involved. The fear of the other customers, the embarrassment of the staff, the tension in the air. He allowed the employee to continue, knowing that eventually the truth would come out. He was ready for the confrontation, ready to reveal his identity and explain the purpose of his undercover visit. But for now, he let the scenario play out naturally, observing with a keen eye and a calm heart. The scene was unfolding exactly as he had anticipated, and he took mental notes of every moment, knowing that this would be a story that taught lessons not just for the employees but for the bank as a whole. The CEO's calm presence contrasted sharply with the chaos around him. He noticed the small gestures, a young teller trying to focus despite the commotion, a customer offering a quiet word of encouragement, the way other staff members hesitated, unsure how to intervene. It was a microcosm of human reactions, a lesson in leadership, patience, and empathy. As the tension reached its peak, the CEO prepared himself for the next step. Soon he would reveal who he was, but first he needed to let the moment speak for itself. This was not just a test of the staff's behavior, it was a mirror for the entire organization, reflecting weaknesses, strengths, and areas for growth. Every detail mattered. Every action was a teaching moment, and he was there to see it all unfold. The scene was chaotic, human, and real. It was the perfect start to a day that would change not only the staff's perspective, but also the culture of the bank itself. The CEO, quiet and observant, remained at the center, a calm presence amid the storm, ready to turn a tense moment into a powerful lesson that would be remembered for years. The situation inside the bank grew more intense by the minute. The middle-aged employee who had initially raised his voice was now fully convinced that the man he was handling was trying to commit fraud. He gestured to the security guard, urging him to take firm action. The CEO, still calm and composed, allowed the events to unfold, quietly observing every detail with sharp attention. The security guard stepped closer, his posture rigid and alert. He had been trained to follow instructions and keep the bank safe, but he hesitated for a moment, sensing the tension that radiated from the other employees and the crowd of customers who were now watching closely. The man at the counter explained rapidly, pointing at the CEO and muttering accusations, claiming that something was off about his documents and behavior. The guard listened carefully but still looked uncertain, torn between following protocol and reacting to the aggressive tone of his colleague. Other customers began to murmur, their eyes darting between the CEO, the employee, and the security guard. Some were shocked by the sudden escalation, while others whispered quietly to each other, speculating about what might be happening. A few people started recording on their phones, sensing that this was unusual and possibly newsworthy. The atmosphere was tense and the air seemed heavy, charged with confusion, fear, and curiosity. The CEO tried again to explain himself, using a calm, soft voice. He asked simple questions and clarified his identity as an ordinary customer needing assistance. But the employee was beyond reason at that moment. His pride and sense of authority had taken over, making it impossible for him to accept any explanation. He continued to insist that the man was suspicious and needed to be detained until the issue could be verified. The security guard followed instructions, moving closer to position the CEO in a less visible area of the bank, trying to minimize the disturbance for other customers. The CEO allowed himself to be gently guided, keeping his composure and watching closely. He was analyzing everything: the body language of the staff, the reactions of the other customers, and the small details that often went unnoticed in daily operations. A young teller standing nearby watched nervously, unsure whether to intervene or stay silent. She could see that the situation was escalating beyond a normal customer service issue. Other staff members exchanged worried glances, sensing that this moment could have serious consequences. The CEO observed them as well, noting how fear, confusion, and loyalty influenced their actions. He silently made mental notes, aware that this moment was teaching him as much about human behavior as it was about his employees. The middle-aged employee's voice grew louder, his tone sharper. He accused the CEO of being dishonest and insisted that legal action might be necessary. The words cut through the air, drawing attention from every corner of the bank. Some customers gasped. Others looked away uncomfortably. The tension was palpable, and it felt as if the bank itself was holding its breath, waiting for the next move. The CEO remained unflustered. He understood the fear and mistrust that had caused this reaction. He knew that most employees relied on rules and appearances to navigate their work, and any deviation could trigger suspicion. He had purposely acted clumsy and awkward to test these reactions, and now he was witnessing them in full force. Despite the rough handling and harsh words, he did not resist or show anger. Instead, he used the moment to observe, to learn, and to understand the human side of his organization. Customers continued to watch, some stepping back to give space, others leaning in, unable to look away. The bank, usually filled with the routine sounds of typing, cash counting, and polite conversations, was now alive with tension, whispers, and the subtle hum of nervous energy. The CEO felt the weight of the situation, but also the clarity of purpose. Every action, every response, and every gesture mattered. The employee finally decided to escalate further. He signaled to a senior security officer nearby, hoping to involve higher authority. He believed he was following protocol, protecting the bank and ensuring safety. The CEO, still calm, noted the fear and pride that had driven the employee to this point. It was a human story, one of misunderstanding and misplaced authority, played out in the midst of an ordinary day at the bank. As the senior security officer approached, the crowd of customers became even more aware of the situation. A few tried to step forward, asking if everything was okay, but the employee waved them back with an impatient gesture. The CEO's calm presence contrasted sharply with the rising panic, and some customers started to whisper about how composed he was despite being treated roughly. The contrast was stark, one man maintaining dignity and patience, while the other, driven by pride and stress, had lost control. The senior officer spoke to the employee in a low voice, asking questions, trying to understand the situation. The employee, still adamant, recounted his suspicions, pointing at the CEO and insisting on detention. The senior officer glanced at the documents in the CEO's hands and noticed small inconsistencies in presentation, as the CEO had intended. These were deliberate minor errors designed to provoke a reaction. The officer looked back at the CEO, who nodded slightly, indicating calmness and cooperation. This small nod, subtle and controlled, showed that the CEO was neither aggressive nor dangerous. The crowd of customers continued to watch silently, some whispering, some exchanging looks of disbelief. The CEO used the opportunity to observe their reactions as well. People were naturally drawn to conflict but also sensitive to fairness and empathy. Many were quietly rooting for him, hoping for a resolution without harm or humiliation. It was a delicate balance of human emotion and judgment, a test of character for everyone involved. Suddenly, the employee decided to take direct action. He tried to place the CEO under physical restraint, attempting to prevent him from moving freely. The CEO allowed it, understanding that this was part of the test he had set up. He remained calm, keeping his tone polite even as the employee's grip grew firmer. The security guard hesitated for a moment, unsure whether to intervene more forcefully, reflecting the natural hesitation people feel when authority and uncertainty collide. The situation seemed to hang in the air for several minutes, filled with tension and uncertainty. Every person present was now fully aware that something unusual was happening. The CEO continued to remain composed, observing human reactions, noting fears, judgments, and the sometimes irrational nature of pride and authority. He had come to understand that leadership was not only about making decisions from a top office, but also about seeing the human side of every operation, understanding reactions and correcting behavior with insight and care. Finally, the employee stepped back slightly, giving the CEO a moment to speak again. The man used soft words, explaining his intent in simple language. He tried to calm the guard and the employee, highlighting that he was not a threat and only required assistance with a routine matter. The employee, still tense and angry, struggled to believe him, but there was a slight shift. A tiny crack of doubt appeared, as if the possibility of error in judgment had entered his mind. As the CEO continued to speak with a calm voice, emphasizing clarity and cooperation, the senior security officer looked closely at the situation, weighing the employee's accusations against the actual facts. The tension slowly began to shift. The bank, once filled with frustration and fear, now felt a subtle change in the atmosphere. The employees were realizing that patience, observation, and empathy were essential in handling unexpected situations. Throughout the ordeal, the CEO remained silent internally, absorbing every detail. He noticed the subtle ways fear influenced decisions, how pride could cloud judgment, and how empathy and calm could diffuse tension. He understood that these moments, while stressful, were opportunities to teach lessons about human behavior, leadership, and accountability. The crowd of customers started murmuring approval quietly, impressed by the man's calm demeanor under pressure. They observed the contrast between his composure and the employee's frustration, noticing the difference between measured patience and impulsive reaction. Some even whispered that the man seemed more in control and respectful than the staff member who had escalated the situation. The employee, realizing that he was being watched not just by colleagues but by the public, grew increasingly uneasy. Pride battled with doubt in his mind. He began to question his actions, wondering if he had gone too far. The CEO noticed this subtle shift, a critical moment that revealed the power of observation, composure, and human influence. The CEO remained in control of his emotions, using the moment as a living lesson. He could feel the energy of the room, the collective attention focused on him, and the subtle change in the staff's demeanor as they realized that behavior under pressure mattered more than rigid adherence to protocol alone. This was the essence of leadership he had sought to observe, and it was unfolding naturally before him, full of raw human truth. As the tension slowly began to settle, the CEO prepared himself for the next stage. Knowing that the revelation of his identity would soon bring closure and understanding, but for now he allowed the scenario to continue naturally, letting the human reactions play out, capturing every nuance and making careful mental notes. It was a real living, breathing demonstration of behavior, patience, and the consequences of judgment under stress. This moment, charged with emotion, tension, and observation, was exactly why he had come undercover. He saw the human side of his employees, understood their fears and frustrations, and witnessed firsthand how quickly misunderstandings could escalate into conflict. The lesson was clear. Leadership required not just rules and regulations, but empathy, patience, and the ability to see beyond appearances. And in this moment, he was learning it all deeply, personally, and without interruption. The tension in the bank had reached a point where every person in the room was fully aware that something extraordinary was happening. The employees were uneasy. The customers whispered nervously, and the security team remained cautious, unsure how to proceed. The CEO stood quietly, composed and observant, letting the moment play out naturally. He could feel the weight of the situation but understood that this was the perfect time to reveal the truth. He took a deep breath and gently spoke to the senior security officer, explaining that he was the CEO of the bank. The words hung in the air, almost surreal. As the reality of the statement began to sink in, the employee who had accused him of fraud froze, his eyes wide with disbelief. The customers who had been watching closely gasped, some dropping their phones in surprise, others murmuring excitedly. It was as if time had slowed, and everyone was holding their breath, trying to process what they had just heard. The senior security officer, initially skeptical, looked at the CEO carefully, noticing subtle details in his demeanor, his confidence, and the way he had handled himself through the stressful situation. It was clear to him that this was no ordinary customer. The revelation started to change the entire dynamic in the bank. The tension that had dominated the room began to shift, replaced by shock, realization, and curiosity. The employee who had detained the CEO now struggled to find words. His pride and embarrassment clashed with the sudden awareness of his mistake. He had acted aggressively, assuming the worst about someone he had no reason to suspect. The CEO, noticing the internal struggle, remained calm, waiting for the employee to come to terms with the truth. It was a delicate moment, a test of humility, and a chance for the employee to reflect on his actions. Other staff members started murmuring among themselves, some expressing surprise, others whispering apologies for not recognizing their CEO. The atmosphere was heavy with realization. The customers, now fully aware of the situation, looked on with fascination. Many were impressed by the CEO's patience and composure, recognizing the contrast between his behavior and the hasty actions of the employee who had escalated the situation. The CEO addressed the bank staff directly, explaining the purpose of his undercover visit. He spoke softly but firmly, emphasizing that the experience was designed to reveal how employees handled challenging situations and how customers were treated. His words carried weight not just because he was the owner, but because they were delivered with insight, understanding, and a desire to improve the work environment. The employee, still stunned, tried to respond, but the words felt inadequate. He realized that he had overstepped boundaries, misjudged a situation, and allowed pride to cloud his judgment. The CEO listened patiently, acknowledging the difficulty of the moment while making it clear that accountability was essential. It was a lesson not just for him but for the entire staff. Highlighting the importance of professionalism, patience, and empathy, the customers began to relax, sensing that the situation was moving toward resolution. Many expressed quiet admiration for the CEO's ability to remain calm under pressure and handle the situation with grace. They recognized that leadership was not just about authority, but about understanding human behavior and guiding others through challenges. The CEO continued to address the staff, sharing insights he had gathered during his observations. He pointed out moments of strength, moments of weakness, and opportunities for improvement. He praised those who had remained composed and professional, while gently highlighting areas where behavior could be improved. It was a comprehensive reflection, delivered with clarity, empathy, and authority. The employee who had detained the CEO now faced the full reality of his actions. The weight of embarrassment, guilt, and realization settled heavily on him. He understood that his actions, though well-intentioned in his mind, had caused unnecessary conflict and stress. The CEO, recognizing the human side of the mistake, addressed him directly, explaining the impact of his behavior and the importance of accountability. The staff listened attentively, absorbing the lessons being shared. They began to reflect on their own behavior, considering how they might react differently in future situations. The CEO's approach was not punitive in tone but firm and educational. It was clear that the purpose of this exercise was to foster growth, awareness, and improvement, rather than merely to punish mistakes. As the reality sank in, the employee struggled to maintain composure. He felt exposed, not just to his colleagues but to the customers who had witnessed the entire ordeal. His pride had been challenged, and he faced a choice: to accept the lesson and learn from it, or to resist and maintain his defensiveness. The CEO's calm presence and thoughtful words encouraged reflection, making it possible for the employee to see the opportunity for growth. The CEO then shifted focus to the wider staff, addressing the importance of empathy and patience in customer interactions. He shared examples from his undercover experience, illustrating how small gestures, calm words, and understanding attitudes could prevent conflict and build trust. The message was clear. The bank's success depended not just on financial transactions, but on the human connections created through professionalism and care. The employees began to nod, some quietly admitting their own challenges in handling difficult situations. The experience served as a mirror, reflecting their strengths and weaknesses. It was a moment of collective introspection, guided by the CEO's thoughtful approach and real-world example. The bank, once a place of routine transactions, had transformed into a living classroom for leadership, accountability, and empathy. The customers, now witnessing the staff's reflections and the CEO's explanations, felt a sense of reassurance. They saw that the bank valued not just money and transactions, but respect, fairness, and learning. The CEO's approach humanized the institution, showing that mistakes could be addressed constructively and that leadership involved understanding and guidance. Finally, the CEO addressed the employee who had escalated the situation most aggressively. He explained the consequences of the actions, emphasizing that respect and professionalism were non-negotiable. The employee listened, humbled, and aware that his actions had crossed a line. The CEO made it clear that accountability was essential for the safety and reputation of the bank, and that lessons from this moment would guide future behavior. The room fell silent for a moment, as everyone absorbed the significance of what had happened. It was more than just an incident. It was a powerful lesson in human behavior, judgment, and leadership. The CEO's calm, patient, and insightful approach had turned a tense, potentially damaging situation into an opportunity for growth, reflection, and learning. The staff began to relax, understanding that the experience was not just about punishment, but about awareness and improvement. The customers, too, sensed the transformation, recognizing the commitment to professionalism and care. The bank had shifted, even in a small way, toward a culture of reflection, responsibility, and empathy. As the CEO concluded his explanation, he allowed the employee who had misjudged the situation to speak. The man admitted his mistake, expressing regret and understanding for the distress he had caused. It was a moment of vulnerability, a rare acknowledgement of human error in a professional setting. The CEO responded with measured words, balancing accountability with the opportunity for redemption. The staff members exchanged glances, absorbing the lesson fully. They realized that leadership was not just about rules and authority, but about understanding, patience, and the ability to guide others through challenging moments. The CEO's actions had provided a real-world example of this principle, leaving a lasting impression on everyone present. Customers began to leave the bank, some commenting quietly on the unusual but enlightening experience they had witnessed. Others expressed appreciation for the CEO's approach, noting the contrast between his calm demeanor and the previous tension. The story of the incident would likely spread, serving as an example of leadership, accountability, and human behavior in action. The employee who had caused the commotion remained quietly reflective. He understood the gravity of his actions and the lesson he had been given. The CEO's approach, firm yet empathetic, had allowed him to see the importance of professionalism, patience, and respect. It was a transformative moment, a turning point that could influence his future behavior positively. The CEO, having revealed his identity and explained the purpose of his undercover visit, took a step back to observe the overall impact. The staff had learned valuable lessons, the customers had witnessed professionalism under pressure, and the bank as an institution had demonstrated a commitment to growth, accountability, and care. It was a moment of clarity and understanding, a story that would resonate with everyone involved. The incident, while stressful and tense, had achieved its purpose. The CEO had observed human behavior in its rawest form, learned about the strengths and weaknesses of his staff, and created a real-world lesson in leadership, empathy, and accountability. The employees would carry this experience forward, aware of the impact of their actions, the importance of patience, and the value of understanding the human side of every interaction. As the CEO prepared to leave the scene, He reflected quietly on the experience. The challenges, the misunderstandings, and the lessons were all part of the journey toward building a stronger, more empathetic and accountable organization. The bank had witnessed a moment of real human truth, and the CEO had ensured that the lesson would last far beyond that day. The atmosphere in the bank had shifted dramatically after the revelation. What had started as a tense and uncomfortable situation transformed into a moment of reflection and learning for everyone present. The CEO, having revealed his true identity, now took the opportunity to address the staff more thoroughly, ensuring that the lessons from the incident would resonate deeply and leave a lasting impact. He began by acknowledging the stress that employees often faced. Bank staff had to handle a constant flow of customers, each with unique needs, questions, and sometimes frustrations. The CEO explained that it was understandable for mistakes to happen, for patience to be tested, and for tensions to rise. However, he emphasized that how one reacted in those moments made all the difference. Respect, professionalism, and empathy were not optional. They were essential qualities that defined the bank's culture and reputation. The employee who had aggressively detained the CEO stood silently, visibly shaken. He had realized the magnitude of his actions and the mistake he had made. The CEO addressed him directly but calmly, explaining that while errors were part of being human, certain behaviors could not be tolerated. Actions that disrespected or endangered others, even unintentionally, had consequences. This was a moment of accountability, a time to recognize that authority and power came with responsibility. Other employees listened intently. They had witnessed the incident unfold, and they understood the gravity of what had occurred. Some had felt fear, others embarrassment, and a few relief that the situation had not escalated further. The CEO's words reinforced the importance of mindfulness in daily interactions, the necessity of patience, and the impact that small decisions could have on the larger environment. Every gesture, every tone of voice, and every choice of words contributed to the overall experience of customers and colleagues. The CEO shared examples from his undercover observations. He spoke of the young teller who had maintained composure under pressure, of colleagues who had assisted without drawing attention to themselves, and of small actions that made a big difference in customer experience. By highlighting these examples, he encouraged the staff to recognize positive behaviors and to emulate them. This approach was not about criticism alone. It was about learning, growth, and reinforcement of values. He then focused on the employee who had mishandled the situation. The man's actions had created chaos, embarrassment, and potential risk for the bank. The CEO explained that while mistakes were forgivable, repeated behavior or deliberate disregard for professional standards could not be ignored. He outlined the consequences clearly, emphasizing that accountability was essential not only for personal growth, but also for the safety and integrity of the organization. The employee, understanding the seriousness of his mistake, nodded quietly. There was a mix of emotions on his face: shame, regret, and realization. The CEO acknowledged these emotions, recognizing that accepting one's mistakes required humility and courage. He emphasized that learning from the incident was the true measure of professionalism, and that growth often came from facing uncomfortable truths. Other staff members began reflecting on their own experiences and interactions. They thought about moments when frustration had gotten the better of them, when impatience had influenced decisions, or when pride had clouded judgment. The CEO encouraged this self-reflection, stressing that awareness of one's own behavior was the first step toward meaningful improvement. It was a gentle but firm reminder that leadership and accountability were shared responsibilities, extending beyond a single individual to the collective team. The customers in the bank, who had observed the entire event, also played a silent role in this learning moment. Their presence reminded the employees that every action was visible, that the way they treated others had immediate and lasting effects. The CEO pointed out that building trust with customers depended on consistent behavior, genuine respect, and a commitment to service excellence. These principles were non-negotiable, forming the foundation of the bank's reputation and success. The CEO moved through the staff, engaging directly with individuals, asking questions and listening to their thoughts. He encouraged open dialogue, allowing employees to express concerns, frustrations, and ideas for improvement. This approach fostered a sense of inclusion, trust, and collaboration, making it clear that the purpose of the exercise was constructive rather than punitive. The staff began to open up, sharing their experiences and acknowledging the pressures of their roles. The employee who had mishandled the CEO was given time to speak. He admitted that he had acted hastily, driven by pride and a desire to enforce rules without fully understanding the situation. His acknowledgement was met with a combination of support and firm guidance from the CEO. The lesson was reinforced. Understanding, patience, and humility were essential. And while mistakes could be forgiven, the approach and attitude mattered more than the error itself. The CEO then introduced practical steps to prevent similar incidents in the future. He proposed additional training in customer service, conflict resolution, and stress management. Role-playing scenarios, workshops, and team discussions would provide opportunities for staff to practice patience, empathy, and clear communication. The focus was not only on correcting mistakes, but on proactively building skills that would enhance professional behavior and customer satisfaction. He also emphasized the importance of observation and self-awareness. Staff were encouraged to recognize moments when their own emotions could influence decisions and to develop strategies for maintaining composure under pressure. The CEO shared his own experiences, illustrating that even leaders could face challenging moments and that self-reflection was key to improvement. The conversation turned toward accountability policies. The CEO explained that while the bank valued its employees and recognized human fallibility, certain actions could not be tolerated. Behaviors that disrespected others, created unnecessary conflict, or violated the principles of professionalism would result in serious consequences. This clear communication ensured that everyone understood the expectations and the standards required. The employee who had detained the CEO was informed of the bank's decision. His actions had crossed a line, and despite the lessons learned, he would no longer be part of the team. The announcement was firm but delivered with respect, highlighting that accountability was not about punishment alone, but about protecting the integrity of the institution and ensuring a safe, professional environment for staff and customers alike. The rest of the staff absorbed the news with a mix of surprise, reflection, and understanding. The CEO used the moment to reinforce the lessons, emphasizing that consequences were an integral part of accountability. It was not about fear, but about creating a culture where professionalism, empathy, and respect were paramount. Customers watching the scene unfold continued to express quiet admiration for the CEO's approach. They observed the balance between firmness and compassion, the focus on learning and improvement, and the emphasis on human behavior rather than rules alone. It was a demonstration of leadership that left a lasting impression, showing that true authority was exercised with understanding and care. The CEO concluded the discussion by summarizing the key lessons: the importance of empathy, the need for patience, the value of humility, and the necessity of accountability. He encouraged staff to reflect on their own experiences, to consider how they might respond differently in future situations, and to embrace continuous learning as a central part of their professional growth. The staff began to regain a sense of normalcy. They returned to their duties with a renewed understanding of expectations, a clearer sense of professional standards, and a commitment to applying the lessons learned. The incident, while intense and challenging, had become a powerful catalyst for positive change, shaping the culture of the bank in a meaningful way. The CEO observed quietly as the staff resumed their work. He noticed subtle changes in demeanor, interactions with customers, and attention to detail. The experience had left an imprint, a tangible reminder of the importance of behavior, empathy, and professionalism. It was clear that the lessons from this day would influence the team long after the incident had ended. As the day progressed, the bank returned to its normal rhythm. The tension of the morning faded, replaced by a sense of awareness, accountability, and growth. The CEO reflected on the experience, satisfied that the objectives had been met. He had observed human behavior in a high-pressure scenario, addressed critical issues, and reinforced a culture of professionalism and respect. The staff, now more conscious of their actions and attitudes, moved through their tasks with greater mindfulness. The customers continued their transactions, unaware of the full depth of the lesson being internalized by the employees. The bank had transformed, even if subtly, into an environment where respect, accountability, and empathy were not just ideals but lived principles. The CEO's presence, calm guidance, and thoughtful approach had turned a potential crisis into a moment of education and growth. The fired employee served as a reminder of accountability, while the remaining staff embodied the lessons learned. The bank had emerged stronger, more aware, and better equipped to handle challenges, with a renewed commitment to professionalism and customer care. As the workday drew to a close, the CEO took a moment to reflect quietly on the events. The chaos, the tension, and the human reactions had provided invaluable insight into the behavior of his staff. The pressures of their roles and the importance of leadership, grounded in empathy and accountability, it was an experience that would continue to inform decisions, training, and the culture of the bank for years to come. After the tense morning and the important lessons, the bank slowly returned to its normal rhythm. Customers were quietly completing their transactions. Employees moved through their duties with a renewed focus, and the atmosphere had shifted from chaos to calm. The CEO, having revealed his identity and addressed the staff, now took a moment to reflect on the impact of the day and consider the lasting effects of the events that had unfolded. The employee who had mishandled the situation had been removed from his position, serving as a clear example of the importance of accountability. The remaining staff, meanwhile, had absorbed the lessons fully. They had witnessed firsthand how pride and misunderstanding could escalate into conflict, and how patience, empathy, and clear communication could prevent unnecessary tension. The CEO observed quietly, noticing subtle changes in behavior, small gestures of attentiveness, and increased care in interactions with customers. Throughout the rest of the day, the CEO continued to interact discreetly with staff, engaging in small conversations and asking questions to understand their experiences. He wanted to ensure that the lessons were internalized and that the focus remained on growth rather than fear. Staff members responded positively, sharing their thoughts and acknowledging the stress they often felt in their roles. It was clear that the day had provided a unique opportunity for reflection and insight. The customers also played a role in reinforcing the lessons. Many noticed the changes in staff behavior, the improved attentiveness, and the calm, professional manner in which employees now approach their tasks. Some commented quietly on the improvement, expressing appreciation for the bank's commitment to professionalism and customer care. These small observations reinforced the importance of the CEO's efforts and highlighted the positive ripple effects of leadership grounded in empathy and accountability. The CEO considered the larger picture. While the incident had been dramatic, it had achieved its purpose to reveal weaknesses, demonstrate the impact of human behavior under stress, and provide a platform for learning and growth. He recognized that true leadership required engagement at all levels, direct observation, and the willingness to address difficult situations head-on. The experience had reinforced his understanding of the complexities of human behavior, the challenges of leadership, and the importance of maintaining integrity and empathy in every interaction. Later in the day, the CEO convened a brief meeting with the remaining staff. He shared insights, highlighted positive behaviors, and discussed strategies for handling challenging situations in the future. The focus was on proactive improvement, teamwork, and creating an environment where mistakes could be acknowledged and corrected without fear. The employees listened attentively, taking in the guidance and reflecting on their own actions and attitudes. The meeting also addressed customer service protocols. The CEO emphasized that every interaction mattered, that small gestures of kindness and patience could have a lasting impact, and that professionalism was not just about completing tasks, but about creating a positive experience for every individual who entered the bank. Staff members asked questions, sought clarification, and engaged in discussions about how to implement these principles in practical ways. The atmosphere was collaborative, constructive, and focused on growth. The CEO also highlighted the importance of self-awareness. He encouraged employees to recognize their own emotional triggers, to pause and reflect before reacting, and to develop strategies for maintaining composure under pressure. These lessons were not theoretical. They were grounded in the real events of the morning, making them tangible, relatable, and memorable. The staff began to see how their personal behavior influenced not just individual interactions, but the overall culture of the bank. As the afternoon progressed, the CEO moved through the bank, observing staff as they resumed their duties. He noted the careful attention to detail, the polite and professional tone in conversations, and the increased empathy shown toward customers. Small improvements were evident, and the staff appeared more confident, aware, and engaged. The CEO felt satisfied that the day's events had created meaningful change, both immediately and for the future. He took a moment to speak privately with some of the employees who had been directly involved in the morning's incident. The discussions were honest, reflective, and focused on growth. The employees expressed their understanding of the impact of their actions, acknowledged their mistakes, and committed to applying the lessons learned. The CEO provided encouragement, emphasizing that learning from mistakes was a critical component of professional development and personal growth. The experience also prompted discussions about team dynamics and collaboration. Employees reflected on how supporting one another, communicating effectively, and maintaining a calm professional demeanor could prevent misunderstandings and create a more positive work environment. The CEO reinforced these points, highlighting that a strong team culture was essential for both employee satisfaction and customer experience. By the end of the day, the bank had returned to a steady, calm pace. The lessons from the incident had been absorbed, the staff had reflected on their behavior, and the CEO had provided guidance, insight, and encouragement. The employees were more aware of their actions, more confident in their abilities, and more committed to upholding the principles of professionalism, empathy, and accountability. The CEO took a final walk through the bank, observing the improved atmosphere. The interactions between staff and customers were smoother, more respectful, and more attentive. The employees carried themselves with a renewed sense of purpose and awareness, understanding the importance of their roles and the impact of their behavior. The customers in turn experienced a more positive, professional, and considerate service environment. As the bank closed for the day, the CEO reflected on the journey. The morning's incident, while challenging and uncomfortable, had served as a powerful catalyst for change. It had revealed weaknesses, highlighted strengths, and provided opportunities for growth. The employees had learned valuable lessons about human behavior, patience, and empathy, and the organization as a whole had strengthened its culture of accountability and professionalism. The CEO recognized that leadership was not just about making decisions from a distance, but about engaging directly, observing behavior firsthand, and providing guidance when necessary. The day had demonstrated the importance of humility, reflection, and proactive improvement. It had shown that even in moments of conflict or misunderstanding, there were opportunities to teach, learn, and grow. The employees left the bank that evening with a sense of clarity and purpose. They understood the expectations, had reflected on their own behavior, and were motivated to apply the lessons learned. The experience had been a turning point, a memorable and meaningful lesson in professionalism, accountability, and empathy that would influence their future interactions and shape the culture of the bank for years to come. For the CEO, the day had reinforced the power of observation, patience, and strategic engagement. By stepping into the role of a customer and experiencing the bank from the ground level, he had gained insights that would inform leadership decisions, training programs, and the overall organizational culture. It had been a day of challenges, reflection, and meaningful change, leaving a lasting impact on both the staff and the institution. The story of the incident, while intense and dramatic, ultimately became a story of growth, learning, and transformation. The employees had learned the value of patience, empathy, and professionalism. The organization had reinforced its commitment to accountability and excellence, and the CEO had demonstrated that true leadership involved not just authority, but understanding, guidance, and the willingness to engage directly with the human side of every operation. The events of the day would be remembered, shared, and reflected upon within the bank. The lessons learned would continue to shape behavior, influence decision-making, and strengthen the culture of the organization. The CEO's approach had turned a potentially negative situation into a powerful teaching moment, ensuring that the bank not only recovered from the incident but emerged stronger, more aware, and better prepared for the future. As the lights dimmed and the doors closed, there was a sense of quiet accomplishment. The day had tested limits, revealed truths, and created opportunities for growth. The CEO knew that the lessons learned would resonate, that the staff had been transformed in subtle but meaningful ways, and that the bank as a whole had strengthened its foundation of professionalism, empathy, and accountability. It was a day that would be remembered, a day that had changed the way the organization understood itself, and a day that demonstrated the power of leadership rooted in human understanding.